Fly fishing doesn't start with mastering everything all at once. It starts by knowing just enough to get going. For most people, the problem isn't motivation, it's overload. Too many rods, too many flies, too many options, and no clear sense of what actually matters on day one. Today's episode is all about cutting through the noise. Today I'm sitting down with Phil Monahan, longtime editor at Orvis, a voice at Midcurrent, and the author of the Orvis QuickStart Guide to Fly Fishing. And today Phil's going to get back to the basics, so today you know what's most important when getting started in fly fishing. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Phil Monahan has spent decades teaching, writing, guiding, and answering the same questions throughout his career. And one of them is fly fishing hard. In today's conversation, he explains why it doesn't have to be and how most beginners fall, not because they lack skill, but because they've got too many choices. We're going to fine-tune things today, and by the end of this episode, you'll find out what a brand new fly angler actually needs to know and what can wait. Today, we're going to find out why removing options helps people learn faster, how to think about success before you even catch your first fish, and what separates frustration from progress in those early days on the water. This episode is for new anglers and those just getting started, and for anyone who's ever felt like they were missing that 25%. I'm excited to jump into this one. Here he is, Phil Monahan. You can find him at philmonahan.com. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on here, and we're going to chat, get caught up with you. It's been about over 4 years now since you were on the podcast. We talked about your experience and really your life at Orvis, and I know that's changed in recent years, so we can get an update from you on all that. But this book is really interesting, too, because I think that, you know, there's always this people, I know people in our community, a lot of them are already fly anglers, but there's a lot of people out there that are new to it. So your book is Orvis, the Quick Start Guide to Fly Fishing, and we're going to talk about that today and maybe how to get some more people into the sport we love. But give us an update. What's been happening in the last 4? I know you've had some big changes.
Well, yeah, lots of big changes. About a year ago in October 2024, I got laid off from Orvis along with 111 of my fellow colleagues. And I made the switch at that point to midcurrent.com. Midcurrent, for those of you who don't know, is a website started by my friend Marshall Cutchin all the way back in 2003. And I had actually worked for Marshall at Midcurrent before I joined Orvis. So after 14 years at Orvis, I went back to Midcurrent. And so I've spent the last year at Midcurrent, but that contract ends at the end of 2025. So I'm a free agent again.
Love it, free agent. So you're probably going to be picked up quick off the market because it's, yeah, I mean, the skills you bring to this, I think the last time we talked about the blog post, blogging, right? And that's changed a lot, you know, since then. But blogs are still out there, you know, they still get SEO. It's just changed a lot, especially now you have AI in there and the whole search thing has changed. What do you think? I guess back to Orvis, you probably don't know since you're out of there, but I mean, it seems like it'd be hard to fill a top. You were the editor of the blog, right? That was your main role back then.
Yeah, and you know, obviously changes were made by the people at the top. I would not speak to any of their, I guess, reasons for doing stuff. That wasn't in my wheelhouse. But it was a great place to work for 14 years, and there are still a lot of people there who are my great friends, especially Tom Rosenberg.
Tom, exactly, and we love it too because Orvis, I always had a connection for me since my entire life. You know, a little kid, it was kind of the first brand that I knew of. You know, the first big brands. So that's good there. And the guide too. So talk about this. Let's just jump into the book here a little bit, and we'll bounce around a little bit, but. Talk about how this idea kind of came to be and maybe who the focus is for, you know, who it's targeted for.
Well, this book is really targeted on the person who is just starting fly fishing. I remember 30-something years ago, I was a self-taught fly fisherman. I learned mostly from reading articles in magazines. And one of the memories I have is being out on the water and knowing that I had about 75% of the information I needed to catch a fish, but that last 25% was what was killing me and keeping me from catching fish. And so the idea of this book was to strip away anything extraneous that a brand new angler doesn't need to know yet, and to only focus on those things that you need to know to catch your first trout. So the way I initially pitched it to the publisher was, this is the book you buy on Monday if you're going fly fishing for the first time on Saturday. And the other pitch was, since the both books are published by the same publisher, but I said, the idea is you buy this book, you hopefully catch your first few fish, you realize you want to be a fly fisher, and then you will buy Tom Rosenbauer's Orvis Guide to Fly Fishing, which has all information about all the various kinds of equipment and casts and knots and all that stuff. But I think that to someone just starting out, a book like Tom's might even be a little intimidating, just because it makes it seem like there's so much to know.
That's a good point. It is always the overwhelming thing for new fly anglers is, the casting, the entomology. When you start putting all this, you overload yourself. So how would you break that down? What were I don't know if you want to break down the chapters, or how what are the most important things to start with? Like, what's number one when somebody comes in, they're brand new? What do they need to look at first?
Well, I mean, the book starts off with a question, which is the question that is probably the most common question that any fly fisher gets from other people, which is fly fishing hard? And my answer is no and yes. In that, no, fly fishing is not hard to learn. But if you want to become an expert fly fisher, then it is hard, and you do have to put in a lot of work. Just like, you're not going to go out to the golf course for the first time and start driving the ball straight down the range and putting in from 40 feet. But I do think a lot of people have this impression that the sport itself is difficult, and therefore it's a big impediment to starting, because you need to know so much and you have to be able to do so much. And I don't think that's really true. I think that with some very basic equipment, so a basic box of flies and some basic knowledge of casting and presentation, you can go out and have success on a trout stream. Will you catch as many fish as the expert angler? Of course not. But it's about getting people through that initial hurdle.
And we're going to dig more into these intro steps. But what's the step once they're out there going and maybe they've caught a few fish to get them to the next level? Is that just a slow progression of, because there's a lot to dig into? Where do you take them? I guess once they get in Tom's book, how do you?
One of the ways that I chose to make things as easy as possible in my book was to remove as many choices as possible. So my book is purposely reductive. The idea is, I've been in the how-to writing game since 1996. So I've got a ton of experience at what is the best way that people learn how to do something. And, I'm sure I mentioned this 4 years ago when we talked about this, but over the years, I've developed this notion that no matter what people tell you, what they want more than anything else is to be told exactly what to do. And so, when you wade into a book like Tom's book, which, by the way, is the definitive book on the subject. This is in no way trying to say my book is better than Tom's book, because that's a ridiculous notion. But what Tom's book gives you is a ton of options. And for a lot of people, options are paralyzing. So the goal of my book was to strip away as many options as possible. And so the person can just say, if I follow the steps in this book, I will catch a fish. So then once you've done that, though, now the entire world of fly fishing is open to you. Do you live someplace where warm water or saltwater fly fishing are popular? Do you live in a place where you're fishing high mountain streams or big lowland rivers? You suddenly have all of these different opportunities to explore. And so I think the second step after you've read my book and you've caught your first fish is that you now start to think of what is the kind of fly fisher that you want to become.
No, I totally agree. I think that I find that's what's great about just all the content out there, so, podcasts, videos, whatever, because you can listen to it, then rewind it and listen again. And I do think the exact steps I find myself learning the same way. If I'm taking some class in business or something like that, having those exact steps that you can follow are helpful. And then over time you tweak it. You're like, okay, I've got it now, and now I'm going to tweak it to my own thing after you learn the basics. So I think that's totally right on. What are the, if you were to break it, let's say somebody's listening now, they just picked up this episode, it got shared to them, and they're brand new to, they've never fished before, and they're listening to this. What are those few top 7 or whatever the number is, things that they need to understand to catch that first fish?
Well, I mean, the first thing you have to understand is what kind of fish you can catch. So a lot of people think fly fishing is just trout fishing, but it's not. And in fact, probably the first fish that a large percentage of people catch isn't a trout. It's a panfish. But the very basic things you need to know are, what equipment do you really need? Not equipment do you want, not what equipment is available, but what equipment do you actually need to go catch a fish? And in some respects, that depends on where you live. If you live somewhere warm, of course, you don't even need waders. So, there's the discussion about how you choose a rod and reel, and then how you put all the pieces together. Even something as simple as stringing a rod, as I'm sure you know, there are ways to do it and ways not to do it. One of the goals of this book is to see how much of the frustration that comes with learning a new sport I could remove from the process. So even something as simple as explaining how you string your fly rod so that the line doesn't fall back through the guides when you lose your handle on the line just removes that little bit of frustration, because I don't have any data on this, of course, but I'm sure that there's an inverse relationship between how frustrated someone is and how likely they are to continue to pursue a sport. So, once you've figured out what the gear is that you need and how to put it all together, then really before you can do anything, you need to learn to cast. But you don't need to learn to cast 60 feet. Even expert trout fishers will tell you they catch the vast majority of trout much closer than a lot of people think. And in fact, the better you get at becoming an angler and reading water and knowing how to position yourself, the closer you're going to get to those fish. A really good angler is always as close to the fish as they can possibly be. So learn your basic casts. We're talking very basic. The regular overhead cast and the roll cast is pretty much what you need to go out there that first time. Then what do you put on the end of your line? So again, one of the most paralyzing things for an angler is to stand in front of the fly bin at a fly shop and be presented with hundreds of fly patterns. And fly shops really probably make most of their money indirectly through their fly recommendations, right? That's what really gets the angler to trust a fly shop. If the fly shop says use it to catch that fish. So again, the idea was to simplify to really that super basic trout box. It's not going to allow you to catch fish on a spring creek with super selected trout on a day when they're only choosing one size. But for most places where you're going to catch trout, you'll catch trout with one of these flies.
And these are and I don't know these, I'm guessing these are kind of the 12 flies, the woolly bugger, elker caddis sort of.
Yeah, a lot of them that you would assume. Those flies are popular for a reason, and that's because they catch fish everywhere. And so then really the two things that are left are finding the fish, which a lot of people, they look at a river and they're, well, I don't know where to go.
And that one's hard for not just beginners, but people that have been fishing for 5-10 years or more. That's still a challenge that can be, right, depending on where you're at.
Right. And then so once you have found the fish, how do you present your flies to the fish? And again, we're not focused on the expert, really hard presentations. We're focused on the most basic way to get that fly to the fish.
So in a nutshell, that's it. Those are the top. I mean, for somebody beginner, that's breaking it down to the essence right there.
Right. And obviously I'm leaving out a lot. The book's 180 something pages, but there's a lot of step-by-step photography.
Mm-hmm.
There's really a wonderful, my friend Ted Faseglia, probably the greatest aquatic insect photographer of our time, was incredibly generous and kind and lent his amazing insect images to the book. So for someone who's never been involved in the sport and has never seen what these flies, the actual live insects, look like, it's a great opportunity.
So just going back to this again, and this is high level, but what fish are out there, the gear you need, the rod reel, and on the gear you need, is it for the new person, is it just getting the package? Is that usually the best thing, the rod reel line all in a package?
I think it is, but depending on where you're fishing, what's the proper rod weight, what's the proper rod length. I mean, the most popular fly rod in the world for every company is a 9'5" weight. So at the very beginning of the chapter, it says, if you don't want to read the rest of this chapter, go buy a 9'5" weight.
Grab a 9'5" weight and get a package, so it's good to go.
Yep.
And then that takes care of it. You don't even have to, but you do have the putting the fly on the leader and stuff like that. Do you cover that?
Yep, we cover all the basic knots that you need to get anything done.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're putting together in our Wet Fly Swing Pro community. I'm putting together kind of a year ahead. Like our plan to set up some challenges and just kind of get better at the craft, fly fishing. And we're breaking it up. I found that what I'm hearing from, and ours is a little bit, we've got a lot of people that are in it for swinging flies and spay and stuff, but it's a diversity of people. But casting, is the first thing. It's like because they're a little more experienced, but we're going to spend time on casting, and then we're going to get into more on the techniques, nymphing, swinging flies, dry fly fishing, kind of all the different stuff. Do you focus on that a little bit? Do you cover that a little bit in the book, like the types of, or is that more on the next level of,
I think that's on the next level. Like I said, I am trying to do something very specific and get that person that first taste of success that then makes them crave that next step more.
So yeah, we were talking about basically the gear, right? You went through everything. So you talked about what fish, the gear you need, learning how to cast, choosing the fly, finding the fish, presenting your fly. I mean, that's essentially that's the basics of fly fishing.
Yeah. And then we have a chapter at the end on warm water fly fishing, and then the book ends with sort of, what do you do now? So now you've done this. Now, what's the best way to really become involved in fly fishing as a sport?
And what is the answer on that one? What is the best way?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to obviously buy Tom's book, but also it talks about conservation. It talks about joining your local organizations. Some of the books that I recommend, and really, there's a whole world of fly fishing out there for people, and no matter what you want to do, there's a group of people who are already doing it. I have a good friend, Drew Price, who's a fishing guide on Lake Champlain here in Vermont, and he's catching bowfin and gar, and drum, and all sorts of crazy things. And so there really is no limit. People are always surprised when you mention a species of fish, and they say, "Oh, you can catch that on a fly?" And I have to tell them, actually, you can catch any fish on a fly.
Yeah, any fish. Yeah, mako sharks, you name it.
Yeah, exactly. Huge 600-pound marlin, or, little tiny dace.
And you've really been there for the whole time. And not only have you been there, but you've been documenting it in this educational through Orvis and everything else. What has that been like for you as you look back over your career since, like you said, 96 and the changes?
It's been, I feel like I've been here through some remarkable changes in just the way people consume information about a sport like fly fishing. I started at Outdoor Life magazine, which was pretty much already a dinosaur by 1996. The desktop publishing revolution of the 80s had created all of these vertical, much more specific magazines. Before then, Sportsman, really, you got Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, or Sports Afield, and that gave you everything. That gave you your deer hunting, your bird hunting, your fly fishing, your bass fishing. And then when desktop publishing took off, suddenly you could have a magazine specifically aimed at you for the thing that you like to do, whether that was saltwater fly fishing or warm water fly fishing. When I got to, so I then made the switch to take over as the editor of American Angler, which was one of the vertical publications. And then at the time, Abenaki Publishers, the company that published American Angler, also had a warm water fly fishing magazine, a saltwater fly fishing magazine, and the only one that still exists today, Fly Tire magazine.
Experience the waters of Bristol Bay at Togiak River Lodge, where fly fishing meets Alaska's rugged beauty. This is the place to complete the Alaska Grand Slam with all 5 salmon species, rainbow trout, Arctic char, and more, where each day offers a new Alaskan adventure. You can visit TogiakLodge.com right now to start planning your Bristol Bay experience with Togiak River Lodge. Let Ondemark Lodge give you the Montana fly fishing experience you deserve. The gin clear waters of the Missouri River offer a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, their family of guides will tailor a trip just for you. You can head over to OnDemarkLodge.com to fish one of the great trout streams in the country. Is that the only fly tying magazine left?
Oh, yeah. No, that was pretty much the only one ever, I think. Has there ever been another like real fly tying magazine?
Yeah, maybe there hasn't. Yeah, maybe that is the only one. Yeah, Fly Tire.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Dave Klausmeyer, who was the longtime editor, almost 30 years, just passed away in November, which, I mean, for my money, he's an unsung hero of the fly tying community because he wasn't a big self promoter, but he was really at the center of American fly tying for decades.
We just had, it's out now. Davey McVale is on the podcast, and it was interesting because I love 90% of our episodes are North America based, people here, but I always love hearing people from across the pond because you get a different take on the same evolution that was going on. Changes were happening there, and sometimes even sooner, in the history of over in Scotland and stuff. But yeah, but it's changed. I mean, like you said, YouTube. I mean, look at YouTube now for fly tying. I mean, YouTube, Dave McPhail's got a ton of followers and people. There's probably a whole host of a generation that's watched him and learned from him. It's kind of crazy.
Oh, absolutely. You got to have the subtitles on though when you're watching Davey's tying video.
Yeah, he is tough. That was tough on the podcast. You definitely got to listen up. So yeah, your career, and like we said, we'll put a link in the show notes to that episode we did with you back 4 years ago. But part of it, yeah, you have an interesting career. Really, it's pretty diverse. I mean, it's outdoors, but you've worked with some huge magazines and throughout, and then Orvis, of course. What was that like? Talk about that. I know we talked blogs, before, but what was it like running the Orvis blog? Because I feel like they've always been one of the biggest out there, and I remember that because it was I mean, that's how I first learned about a lot of this stuff was through that blog.
Yeah, I mean, it was a remarkable decision by Orvis to launch the blog, and they had already had success with Tom's podcast.
The podcast was before. Did the podcast come before the blog?
Yeah, podcast, and it's funny, the same person, my friend Jamie Hathaway, who's no longer at Orvis, was the sort of those were his brainchilds. He pushed them to start a podcast, and they did. And then he pushed them to start a blog, which they did.
And where is Jamie now?
Jamie is now the executive director of the Make-A-Wish Foundation for Vermont and upstate New York.
Oh, cool.
But behind the Orvis blog was that it was not going to be about Orvis. It was going to be about fly fishing. And that was a revolutionary idea, that we're going to start this blog, but it's not going to be selling Orvis. So I had a remarkable amount of freedom. And, it's funny, we were talking about the transitions before. So I went from a dinosaur of a huge national magazine to one of those vertical print magazines, and then made the leap to online, which was the next, of course, big revolution in delivering content. And, there was sort of a golden age of blogs, which is now past. You may remember in the I don't know, say 2012 to 16, there were many, many fly fishing blogs, like a lot of them. And only a few have really come out the other side. A lot of them just went away for various reasons. And the ones that had really strong readership and really strong point of view have remained. So something like the Fiberglass Manifesto or Southern Culture on the Fly, Gink and Gasoline. But there used to be dozens more. I think a lot of people realize just how grueling it is to produce content at the rate required to keep your audience really interested.
Right. Which is that daily, more than daily? What is that rate now?
Well, I mean, in my 14 years at Orvis, we published 11,000 blog posts.
Yeah, that's right. 11,000.
Yeah, there were times when we would publish, 3 or 4 a day. And then the next big shift was social media.
And social, right?
I think in a lot of ways, social media sort of meant the death of the blog as the major form because you could get things in much smaller chunks, much faster on social media. So by the time I was done at Orvis News, the majority of the traffic to the news came via social media. So a blog post would go up on Orvis News, and then we would post it to social media, and that's how people would come to the blog post. Whereas, you know, 7, 8 years earlier, people would just go to the blog because they knew there was stuff there to read.
Yeah, and it's all changing now as we speak because social has gone from it used to be about your followers, and now because of TikTok, it's all about just the algorithm and how well the stuff's doing. If the stuff's doing well, it'll get shared to new people that don't even know about you, and then it could go viral, right? It's this interesting, crazy world.
Right. I mean, that gets harder and harder as the algorithm becomes more and more pay for play.
Yeah, it's interesting that world. It's all about getting good information out there. Which, like you said, you did 11,000 blog posts. I'm sure most of those were great blogs, but maybe some of them didn't get the views they should deserved, just because of the algorithm or whatever was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because each new platform sort of creates the same problem. And that problem is, how do you tell the good information from the not so good information?
Right. Yeah, like the AI. Think of that. All this AI stuff right now. It's going on. There's some really bad stuff out there.
Yeah. And so, the issue becomes, how do you make yourself a trusted source? How do you make your point of view, your information, something that people know they can rely on? And as the pieces of information get more and more fragmented by social media, I think that problem becomes highlighted even more.
I always love that's where the podcast is a little bit. For me, I've always enjoyed it, but it's cool because it's hard to be in an hour-long conversation to make stuff up. I mean, you can get a real good perspective on who the people are. So I think that's why the podcast works, because they listen to you or anybody else for an hour, and it's clear, okay, that person knows what's going on with that subject, right? And so, I mean, obviously you've got your whole career, with backed with what you do, but I think that's a big part of podcasting. Do you find? I mean, I think Tom's still going strong. I always talk. It's always been one of the biggest fly fishing podcasts, right? He's still going strong out there.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, he's been the king of the hill for quite a long time, for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, well, let's get back. I just want to circle back around to the book, because I think this is going to be a resource that we're going to use for people that are new out there, and we'll direct them, if they want to hear the podcast, get to know a little bit of you, and then go get your book. But tell us again. So if we walk back through that again, we're looking at somebody that's kind of new to it, and let's just go back to the steps. It's pretty simple. I love this. It's like basically seven steps. What fish? When you go to the what fish, do you talk about, okay, other than trout, panfish, do you go through all the fish? Do you go through just a few? What species? What areas?
Most likely fish that a first time fly fisher is going to be fishing for. So it's really, it's identifying trout. How do you know a brown trout from a brook trout, from a rainbow trout, from a cutthroat trout? Panfish, bass, smallmouth, and largemouth, and pretty much that's it. Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of people going fly fishing for the first time to catch a gar or sailfish or a carp. So again, the goal is to really draw a line between what a first time fly fisher really needs to know versus what might just be interesting. So, I mean, there was a lot of things I wrote, and then as I went through in the editing process, I thought, how vital is this to the new fly fisher? And so a lot of stuff just got tossed, because as you know, especially as a podcast host, we can talk about this stuff forever because once you're in fly fishing, it's endlessly interesting. We could start talking right now about, catching redfish in Louisiana marsh and not be done till the end of the day.
No, or mayflies or or a specific genus of mayflies or
Exactly. Or why you don't need to know that. So yeah, the goal was really to make sure that every single piece of information that's in the book is something that that first time fly fisher is going to need to know. And again, it goes back to my early experiences of feeling like, gosh, this something's something's quite not right here, but I don't know what it is.
yeah. Do you remember that pretty well when you first got started?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was taught to fly fish in January of 1990, I think.
Oh, 90.
Yeah, in the backyard of my brother's girlfriend. He taught me how to cast, and then we went out. New Hampshire has what's called open water season, so it's after January 1st when if creeks don't have ice on them, you can fish. So we went fishing. Neither of us caught anything, but I was immediately hooked. But my brother had a job. I was in graduate school, so I could go fishing whenever I wanted. So I fished almost exclusively by myself for that first year, and tons of trial and error, tons of frustration. And so when I was writing this book, I was really thinking, what is all of the stuff that I wish I had known in those first few months when I was learning to fly fish?
And so yeah, so the species is I like that. Trout, poundfish, bass, pretty simple. The gear we talked about, the rod, the reel, the package, putting the gear together. What is that? What do you cover in the book? So talk about that line deal you mentioned.
I mean, if you go on Reddit, on the fly fishing subreddit, every week you'll see people asking questions like, did I put this line on my reel wrong? Or why do my knots keep failing? Or, can I put a 6-weight line on my 3-weight rod, type of thing. So, the idea is we think because we are longtime anglers that these things are easy. But even to someone who's never seen a fishing rod, never mind a fly rod, simply putting the reel on the rod is not obvious to them. How do I know how to attach the reel to the fly rod? How do I make sure the line is coming out of the reel the right way? How do I know if I put it on backwards? And that as an experienced angler, that you don't grab the end of the tippet and feed that through the guides as you string your fly rod, because if you accidentally lose your grip, the weight of the fly line will cause everything to fall back to the ground.
Yeah, and that's not good. That's annoying.
That's not good. So you grab the fly line, you pinch it into a loop, and you feed the loop through the guides. So even if you drop the line, the loop will expand and usually catch the line at the next guide down, and you haven't lost all the work.
What about on the knots? What are the knots you cover there? Do you cover just a couple, or what are the main knots?
I don't want to. I don't want to confuse anybody. There's no discussion of which knot is better than another knot. Focus is really on, and this is something that I believe overall, is that the best knot is the one that you can tie well every time. So even if under strict testing in the laboratory, one knot outperforms another knot, if that first knot is poorly tied, it's not outperforming anything. So, we do the very basics. We do the clinch knot, we do the perfection loop, we do the surgeon's knot for connecting pieces of tippet, and then we leave it. People can always have the option, once they've decided that fly fishing is for them, to learn all of those other knots. I mean, there are many, I've been in this game now for all this time, and there are lots of knots that I've never even tried.
No, you find the knots that you like. Like for me, I've always been a blood knot sort of person. I've loved the blood knot.
I'm a blood knot guy too, mostly for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah, but there are other knots that, like you mentioned, the surgeon's knot is a great one. That's even easier to tie, probably.
Absolutely. And I as part of my job on the Orvis blog, I posted about tons of knots with, because the posts were always really popular because anglers are always looking for the better knot than the one that I've got. You know, the vast majority of time when a knot fails, it's because it was poorly tied. It's not because that's not a good knot.
Yep, that's right. So yeah, the knots, I think I love that discussion. It's always a good one. We're going to have a whole month segment in our community with knots. We're going to have some, people talking about that. We'll have some discussion, but and then you get into the, so that's the gear, that's getting the gear together. You got your fly, do all that stuff. And then you kind of get to the cast. How do you cover the casting? Because some of this stuff is not easy to just read, right? What are the steps you cover there?
Well, luckily I had access. I wrote this book when I still worked for Orvis. So luckily I had access to Pete Kutzer, who is Orvis's main casting guy. And it was taught literally thousands of people how to cast. But, you know, during my time as a guide back in the 90s, I also taught a lot of people how to cast. And, I take the same approach to it is I don't want to describe the same thing a bunch of different ways. So I really just use the most basic casting method that they use at the Orvis fly fishing schools, which teaches you the pick up and lay down cast, then teaches you how to bring that up into the air, and then really how to present the fly, how to make the presentation cast. And that's it as in terms of we talk a little bit about opening up the loop if you have a heavy nymph rig or a streamer, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about different kinds of casts and different kinds of situations. Because again, then you're giving someone a whole bunch of choices to make when they get on the water. So we teach the basic overhead cast and then the roll cast and little variations of when you might need to change those, but really not very much. And we've got step-by-step photos with Pete casting.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I really feel like there are lots of things in fly fishing that words alone can't get across. And that's why video has become, I think, really the main way that people learn both fly tying and casting. I mean, think of trying to explain in words alone just the plane that your fly tip needs to describe as you're throwing a cast. It's very difficult. So, the old saw that a picture is worth 1,000 words is very clearly true when you're talking about casting.
Well, actually, quite a bit is. Yeah, you have the casting, the fly tying, the knots. It's nice to watch somebody some of that stuff, but you can, and like before video, right? It was all books for the most part.
Oh yeah,
going away. That's one thing we've learned about the revolution in content is that books are definitely not going away, right? There's always going to be room for fly fishing books and other books, right?
absolutely.
Okay, so that's a cast basics again, and then choosing the fly is more again simplify it. You've got a few patterns, and you just grab. How do you talk about that for somebody brand new? Do you talk about the dry fly because you do have the thing? Well, if they grab a dry fly and they're not on the surface, how do you describe that simplified?
Well, yeah, we describe the basic 4 kinds of flies: dry flies, nymphs, wet flies, and streamers. And we touch a little bit on the variations, things like emergers, but really it's about understanding where trout eat and where the things that they eat live and trying to match that with what you've got in your fly box. We don't delve at all into, the proper number of hackle wraps on a Catskill dry, but we do talk about, how to make sure your fly will float. We do talk about how to use nymphs that will get deep. I'm a big believer that for a brand new angler, stay away from split shot. Expert anglers know. I mean, people say, the difference between catching a fish and not catching a fish is often one split shot. I totally agree with that. But for a new angler, split shot seems to me to be a recipe for disaster. So we focus on perhaps using a beadhead fly instead of a split shot, and really just trying to get the angler to understand the concept behind a dry fly, a nymph, a wet fly, and a streamer. Because having taught a lot of people to fly fish, I find that a lot of people will do what you tell them to do, even if they don't understand why they're doing it. And the problem with that is when they're no longer with you, they don't know what to do. And the perfect example of this is the mend. So having been a guy, one of the most common things the guide says is mend. And what I found as a guide was that once some people got mend into their brain, they would just do it in every situation, even when they didn't need it. So what that meant to me is they didn't understand why you make the mend in the first place. They were just mending because that's the thing you did after you cast. You cast and then you mend. But as you know, there are lots of situations where you don't want to mend, or you might want to downstream mend even. So the one place where we did delve a little bit into getting beyond the absolute basics is trying to understand some of the concepts of why you mend, why you cast upstream to allow your fly to sink before it gets to the fish, so that the person can visualize what's happening with their line and their fly in the water.
Right. Is that in the presenting the fly section more?
Yes. Because, I can't tell you how many times I've seen anglers who show up and they just cast mend, considering what the water in front of them is doing. And to be fair, and I had this experience. The person who took most of the photos in this book is my friend Charlie Hildick Smith, who lives right down the river from me here in Vermont. And over the last couple of years, I've been teaching him how to fish. And when you start with someone who has absolutely never done it before, you realize how many things you just do automatically. And for that person, they're not automatic, and you have to actually explain to them. And for me, the toughest thing about fly fishing from the very beginning is that the angler has to do several things at the same time. So once you make the cast and your fly lands on the water, now you have to control the drift, take up slack, deal with the line in your line hand, watch the fly, be aware of the fly line that you're stripping onto the water. That's a lot of stuff holding your head at the same time. And what you find is that often one or two of those things gets lost, and that's where the problem lies. Someone will cast out a fly and then notice that their line on the water is messed up, and they begin to focus on that, and they don't realize that their fly and their line is still in the water and is maybe drifting over a waterfall or into a log or whatever. So the one part of fly fishing that I think is most difficult to deal with, even in a book like mine, which is super simple, is how many balls in the air a fly fisher has at the same time. And how do you make sure that you're paying attention to all of those balls at the same time?
Golden Fly Shop isn't your average fly shop. They have a 12-foot shark painted like a cutthroat hovering over a huge selection of the best rods in the business, a massive assortment of tying materials, and their famous steakhouse streamer display. And it's the hub for a community of anglers who never stop tinkering with new ways to catch fish. Sometimes the conversation behind the counter includes what hatches are going off and what techniques are working best. Then tales of destination fishing adventures, sought-after species, or a good old congratulations when a customer brings stories of finally connecting with that fish they've searched for forever. With a growing online store and a budding YouTube channel, you'll be able to follow along with their fun antics, international adventures, and helpful fly fishing tips. Golden Fly Shop, where the community is hanging out, even if they're supposed to be working. That's goldenflyshop.com. Check them out right now. Definitely, that's not easy for the beginner. What is it like for now? Is this book, we talked about it, for somebody brand new, pick up this book? What if the person is out there, has done a little bit of fly fishing? Is it for them too, or is there some cutoff there? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's definitely for them because, if you are the person who was like me with only 75% of the knowledge, this would be a way to help you fill in those gaps and maybe catch up on what you missed in your initial fly fishing experience. The vast majority of anglers in the world are somewhere between beginner and intermediate. You know, we like to talk a lot and lionize those expert anglers, and most of them are way better than I am, but that represents a pretty small percentage of the fly fishing community. You know, I'm a much worse angler now than I was when I was a fly fishing guide, even though 30 years have gone by, because there's really no substitute for being on the water 60 days in a row.
That's the thing you realize, yeah, those are the guides. And that's why, again, the podcast works so well because most of the time I'm interviewing those experts, and that might be for some species, technique, river system. And so if you want to learn, from the best, right, that's a good place to go, is to hear it directly from them. And I find that all the time. I guided too, and I found that it was not, it was a hard job, but also that I wasn't that good at it, and that I love actually being guided because you learn all this stuff. These guys are it's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And I think, you hinted at it there, but not every expert angler is a good guide.
No, that's for sure true. I think there's the good guys you've seen. I think we've talked about this a number of times, but there's just these people that are born to be a guide. They've got that something. We've talked to them. We've got some that we've already had on this month, this week, that you just hear it the way they talk. They're so passionate about it. They're already out there 300 days a year, and then on their days off, they're still fishing. Like, it's pretty cool. But let's do a quick little segment here. Phil, we got our Wet Fly Swing Pro segment shout out, and we love doing this because we're getting a chance to grow our community and doing some cool stuff here. So today I'm going to give a shout out to Bill, who is in our fly tying challenge. We talked a little bit of fly tying, but he's been in this challenge, and he's going to get a chance. We're going to be doing some cool stuff in there, getting his badge. And obviously the best thing is that we're kind of getting better at it. We're learning from each other. So today this is presented by San Juan Rod Works, who's another great small company out there doing great stuff. So we're going to give a big shout out to Gary and his team over there. But what Bill asked was, he said one thing he really wants to learn more about is trout spay. And that's a big thing we're going to be hopefully diving into. Do you find, first off, good shout out to Bill and San Juan Rod Works, but was trout spay, what's your take on that? Is that something that's just next level that isn't in your book? And then have you written a lot about that?
So trout spay is not something that's in my book because it is next level. First of all, you have to buy a whole new rod, new line, probably some new flies. But I do find that I have really enjoyed it. I learned from Pete Kutzer, and we went out on the bat and kill one morning, and he sort of walked me through how he would fish a pool. I watched him catch 3 fish in the process, which was humbling.
With like swinging like wet flies?
Yes, and the thing, one of the first things I learned was, I had done spay fishing for Atlantic salmon in Norway, which was another spectacular experience, but trout spay is a different animal, and the first thing I saw was how small the flies Pete was using were. I had just tied on my normal streamers, and he showed me his setup, which was much smaller. But first of all, I have a bad shoulder, so trout spay is a great way to go through a whole day of fishing without hurting my shoulder. But it's also sort of a cool, rhythmic way to experience a river that's a lot different from regular fly fishing, where you're really focused on individual spots. So instead, to approach a pool looking to cover the entire thing, while you may expect to catch a fish in particular parts of that pool, you're actually covering the whole thing. And I find it to be a really cool way to fish, especially during those times when there aren't major hatches and perhaps the fish are sulking a little bit.
Yeah, it's part of the the spay, the evolution of spay, and kind of it's always evolving. I think that's what's interesting about fly fishing too. There's always we've all seen those changes over the last 30 years of vaster rods and lines trying to keep up with the rods, and then there's back to glass is back, right? It's pretty fun. What do you think is the new, as you look at this, you've been in this a while. I mean, there's nothing really new, right? It's all the same stuff. But do you see any? What else is left? It seems like there's always, the space here. What else is it? Are we just going to repeat what's been done before for the new stuff in the future?
It's hard to say what the next new thing is, but what seems to be happening is the old is becoming new again. It seems like people are constantly rediscovering older ways of fishing or older kinds of equipment. And, I think that the other big thing is that there's almost no bad fly rods anymore. When I first got into this business, you could go to the fly tackle dealer show and there were a lot of people hawking just sort of objectively cheap, bad fly rods. But the manufacturing has gotten so good that a rod that costs $200 now is as good as a rod that cost $600 20 years ago. And so I think that one of the results of that is there are so many rod models, styles, types on the market now that you can really start to specialize. We saw that with Euro nymphing, big explosion of Euro nymphing. Suddenly everybody wanted an 11-foot 3-weight. So I don't know what the next frontier is, but it does seem like every time something like Euro nymphing runs its course, and then someone figures out a cool new way to use that equipment to perhaps do things that people weren't doing before. I recently saw a cool video by George Daniel talking about using micro jig streamers with his Euro rod. So it just feels like there's a constant refining of every part of the sport. And then you add to that the exploding popularities of species that aren't trout. When Abenaki Publishers published Warm Water Fly Fishing, which I think launched in 1997, most of the companies in the fly fishing industry wouldn't advertise in the magazine because they thought it hurt their brand, because fishers want to know about trout. Now, some of the cutting edge cool guys are the carp anglers in downtown Denver, some of the people that other anglers look up to. Or you see people catching gar or other weird species that you would have never thrown a fly at 20 years ago.
Right. And it's still, I mean, percentage wise, right? It's still probably what do you think? 70%, or what percentage of people are still trout fishing mostly?
Well, I think you're probably right, but I would say a lot of those people are also doing other things which they weren't doing before. So I think the number of trout only anglers has probably gone down, while trout is still far and away the most popular.
Yeah, trout. It's kind of for lack of a better phrase, the gateway drug, right, to the next species.
Right. And it's tied to the history of the sport, which a lot of people love. Trout rivers are certainly more beautiful than, the South Platte through Denver. But I just feel like people's minds have opened up a lot in the last 25 years about all of the different possibilities for catching fish with a fly rod. And that's exciting to me. I love that stuff.
Yeah, me too. I think that's definitely one of the cool things about fly fishing. And then also the, kind of the diversity. And Orvis, back to Orvis, we talked about that at the start. I mean, the 50-50, you were probably there when that campaign first went out, right? Do you remember that, when the 50-50 thing, that was, what was that, 10 years, 15 years ago?
Probably 10-ish. Yeah. And I mean, it was very controversial. There were a lot of people who were very upset.
Yeah. And what were people upset? What was that? Was that just and I remember hearing that because it kind of went viral, right? Like, what was there to be upset about? Because it was just literally, the idea is that you want more diversity of people into fishing.
So what it did was it made people defensive. And people would say, there's nothing about fly fishing that discriminates. And what they couldn't do is put themselves in the shoes of a woman who walks into a fly shop and gets ignored, or a woman who's out on the river and gets heckled. And we ran into the same thing when we began talking about racial diversity in fly. So people would say, you know, who's getting discriminated? And then, Alvin Dido from All Water Guides in Florida, who's one of the most popular YouTube fly fishing person out, went online and said, you want to know what it's like to be a black guy fishing? Let me tell you some stories. And the idea that was that people couldn't empathize, they couldn't put themselves in their shoes, and they immediately got defensive. Joel Johnson, who at one time was the communications director for Trout Unlimited, told a story about getting shot at while trout fishing because he had the audacity to be a black man fly fishing. Now, 90% of fly fishers are totally fine with it, but there's that small percentage of people, and we are in a social media atmosphere, which you are certainly not immune to as online, where people have their set issues that they want to scream about, and they're going to do it no matter what.
And the louder you are, the way it works on social is in some places, right? The louder you scream at one way, whether it's negative or positive, the more reach you get.
Exactly.
Which is not good.
But we had one Orvis customer say, we were trying to create a battle of the sexes by focusing on this issue. And he took all of his Orvis gear and he brought it back and returned it. And then he hilariously posted, to their credit, they took it all back.
Right. They took it all back. God, that's so bizarre. I mean, I feel like I've been saying for a while, I don't know if I'm sure somebody said this before me, but the diversity of people in fly fishing is just like the diversity of species that we're fishing for. The more diverse the community out there in any native species, a stream, the better, the healthier it is. And it's kind of the same way with fly fishing, really anything. The more diverse. That's why this country is great. That's why the U.S. is great, because it's so diverse.
Absolutely. And the more people who are loving our natural resources, the more people we have to protect them.
Exactly. Well, this is good, Phil. I think let's take it out of here with just a couple of tips. We've obviously been talking some quick start tips for somebody new, but what would be your 2 or 3 if you had to say somebody's coming here? Let's just focus on that person that's new. They're getting your book. What are a couple things you're telling them before they get on the water to have success?
Well, the first thing that I always say is really the only reason to go fly fishing is to have fun. So keeping that in the front of your mind is important, especially when you're just starting out. And there are a lot of things about fly fishing that are fun that don't involve catching fish. You get to be out in nature. You get to be hopefully on a beautiful river. You get to see, you may get to travel. You get to see, even if you don't catch a rising fish, just seeing a rising fish is cool.
Yeah. Or a hatch, or being in the middle of a hatch, crazy hatch.
Being in the middle of the hatch is amazing. So always go into it, if you can, with that attitude, because if you're not having fun, you're not going to continue to do this sport. But the other thing I would say is, start small. Start with expectations of focused on your learning rather than on your success. Because one of the beautiful things about fly fishing, and for me, what separates it from conventional angling, is there are many different kinds of success in fly fishing. I consider a good drift to be a success, even if it doesn't catch a fish. If I say to myself, here's where I want this fly to drift naturally through this part of the river, and I accomplish that, even if I don't catch a fish, that's a success. And the more I can have that kind of success, the more I'm going to have the fish catching kind of success. So fly fishing is a process rather than a simple means to an end. And the other thing I would say is go with a friend, especially if that friend is actually an accomplished fly fisher. I think my book is great, but having someone standing next to you who knows what they're talking about is a real added bonus, and will help you learn more quickly and progress as an angler.
Yeah, and that goes with, like you said earlier, the groups, or really anybody to connect with, and
Yeah, I mean, fly fishing is really a community. It's a small community, but it is a community, and fly fishers know when you see the guy walking through the airport with the rod in his backpack. Hey, we're part of the same community. I don't know that guy, but I bet we could hang out.
That's right. Nice. And what would be you mentioned Tom's book. Is there another book you would recommend as a resource for fly fishing for somebody that...
Aside from Tom's book?
Yeah.
I mean, well, first of all, the Orvis Guide to Fly Fishing, Tom's book is certainly the thing. I have always loved the Curtis Creek Manifesto about Sheridan Anderson. It's very short. It's not great on the sort of how-to details as much as it is behind what I was saying before, sort of the concepts of fly fishing, why you do certain things.
Who is that author? Do you remember that, or who that was?
Sheridan Anderson.
Yeah. Is that a person that wrote one book, or did they write, do you know the background at all?
I think he wrote one book. I think he died quite young. I think he was kind of like a sort of hippie angler dude in late 60s, early 70s. But yeah, as far as I know, that's certainly the only book on fly fishing he ever wrote. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah. I got that one on my shelf. I've had that one on my shelf since I was a kid too. I mean, that's amazing. I think there's some of these books out there. Well, this has been great, Phil. Let us know where, what you have planned here. So you've got, you got some time on your hands. Give us a heads up of what you're looking out to and where people can track you down.
Well, I'm going to hit some of the East Coast consumer fly fishing shows in January to hopefully sign some books and give presentations. And the rest of the time I'll be doing a lot of freelance writing and editing, and looking for my next adventure. Perfect.
All right. Well, we'll send everybody out, hopefully meet you up at some of those shows, and they can also go to philmonahan.com or on social media, and we'll be getting the word out as well about your book, and for new folks coming in, or those just getting started, we'll definitely be sending people your way. So this has been great, Phil. Thanks again for catching up and all your time.
Thank you so much, Dave.
I hope you enjoyed that one. If you want to get any more information on this and follow up, you can go to wetflyswing.com. If you want to check out our pro membership, that's wetflyswing.com/pro, and find out what we have going there with trips and goodies inside pro. A lot of good stuff going here. We are turning right around and getting going tomorrow. If you're interested in hearing from CJ, check out tomorrow's podcast, and then we're going to be keeping it moving all year long, and excited to start this year with you. Hope you're enjoying the podcast, and hope you get a chance to check in with me, Dave at Wet Fly Swing, anytime. Hope you're having a good one. Have a great morning, great afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Look forward to catching you on the next episode. Talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.